On today's episode, Josh and I are back to discuss the Damian Lillard situation in Portland. Then we're going to hit a few really briefly because we're getting so close to the NBA Finals here, the conference finals storylines from both the East and the West, the always spinning NBA coaching carousel, and somehow Josh has still got that half-point lead in trivia. I'm trying to take it back. It's my week. Next.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Trevor.
And this is the Two Pointers Podcast. We are back here for another week and kind of a slower week around the conference finals. As things stand currently, the Milwaukee Bucks lead the Atlanta Hawks 2-1, and the Phoenix Suns and the Los Angeles Clippers are going to tip off at time of recording for Trevor. It's 3-1 Phoenix, and good chance the series is probably over by the time that we release this podcast. But we have a few different things that are more related to the NBA offseason that we can jump into, and we're going to start with the developing Damian Lillard situation. So it was announced earlier this week that the Portland Trail Blazers have hired Chauncey Billups as the new head coach. At the same time that these reports were breaking, reports were that Damian Lillard was made very unhappy over the coaching hiring process by the Portland Trail Blazers. Now, to be clear, it is not that Damian Lillard is unhappy about Chauncey Billups being the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers. Apparently, reports are that Damian Lillard was kept, for the most part, out of the loop on the hiring process within the organization. None of his recommendations for head coach, or at least none of the people interviewed for head coach, were recommendations of Damian Lillard. And the decision seems to have been made by the Portland front office completely without his input. Trevor, what are your thoughts hearing that?
So I'm going to address Mr. Damian Lamont Ollie Lillard Sr. directly here for a moment. For those of you who might know, that is Damian Lillard's full name. I'm just going to put this on record like I have many, many times. Get out! Go! Run as far and as fast as you can. Make the call. I wish that was all I had to say and stop there and we can move on, but I don't. This situation is so much more deep and diverse than that. This is the same Portland coaching search that included a woman for the first time, and Damian Lillard they're doing all the right things supposedly on their end, right? But didn't get a single ounce of input, according to Chris Haynes, from their star player, who's right now, is he really their star player after like tomorrow? This situation, like I mentioned to Josh before recording, this could change literally by the minute. Josh, my head is spinning. It is spinning as fast as the NBA coaching carousel is that we'll cover in a moment. I honestly can't gather a clear, concise thought other than he just needs to call it in. Let's go. Get out of town as fast as you can. What about you?
Well, I realized, at least earlier in this week, that the Portland Trail Blazers don't listen to our podcast because when we were covering the Damian Lillard offseason situation, I think I went on for about 5 minutes about the importance of including your franchise's star in the decision-making behind hiring your next coach and how crucial that decision would be for Portland and Damian Lillard staying with the franchise, and how if he was shut out of those decisions, there was a high likelihood of him requesting a trade. And it really seems like that's where we are now. There's nothing, Damian Lillard hasn't requested a trade as far as we know, but the situation doesn't look good. And now that Portland's making decisions without him, I think Portland's only hope is that Chauncey Billups' relationship with Damian Lillard is strong enough to convince him to play this out.
So I guess to reiterate, is your question to me like, is Chauncey's commitment, is Chauncey going to be the reason he ultimately sticks around? Is that what you're getting at?
I'm saying is that's really Portland's only hope of keeping him.
Yeah. I mean, He's the same guy. I think he ultimately has a good relationship with Chauncey. I mean, for what little he probably has in terms of relationship, he was very clear on some allegations that he was not aware of on Billups' behalf. I won't divulge those, but he clearly didn't hate the hire. He was one of the two, and I made sure I noted this in my notes. Like, he was one of the two people that he liked in this search. So the confusion here, I guess, for fans really is what is keeping Lillard there? I mean, they got the coaching guy right. If he wanted Kidd, now to be clear, he was completely upfront about Kidd was the guy he wanted. You're not going to get everything you want, right? They didn't listen to him and out. I mean, they did get ultimately a guy that he liked in Chauncey, but I did a little more digging, and I think people were asking so far, like, how has he made it 11 years in Portland and not like wanted to get out many years prior and given this team multiple chances? And he's remained loyal to Portland in large part due to the tremendous fan base that they have. They have a great fan base in Portland. However, a big however, this is the same fan base that just days ago was attacking him on social media regarding the comments around Chauncey and about, the lack of knowledge around their coaching hire. And I mean, if I'm Lillard, man, if the fans were not the only drop of hope I had left, loyalty in the NBA is almost entirely diminished. He's the only true sign of loyalty we have left, other than some of the larger head coaches in the NBA. Honestly, what is keeping him back? My question I had for you, because I always have a question for Josh, of course, is do we see Damian Lillard next season in a Portland jersey? In your opinion, of course.
So it kind of feels like the James Harden situation again. We're talking about a massive player, one of the, I'll say, top 5 most talented players in the NBA right now, potentially requesting to get out of his city. But we know how huge of a deal it takes to move a guy like that. The move for Anthony Davis was gigantic. The one for James Harden was a little less so, but required 3 teams to kind of make the numbers work and move around. I think we do see Damian Lillard in a Portland jersey next year, because I don't think that they're going to get something done in the offseason. I think it's too big. The asking price is going to be too large to get something done in this short a period of time. And I realize I'm saying this short a period of time being like 3.5 months, but I really think that right now things are moving slow in that situation. I do think sometime in the next year he's going to be playing for a new franchise. I'm not sure if it'll be by the start of next season, though.
So I know how your NBA and your brain works, because I've been doing a podcast with you and your friend for a long time. So I would assume that you don't have any hypotheticals, because it's going to take a while, or you think it's going to take a while. But is there one team right now, knowing what we know, not a month from now, because I agree with you. I think it's going to be a developing situation that may take up until a trade deadline, possibly like Harden did last year. You're correct in that parallel. But knowing what we know right now, if he makes the phone call tonight to say, call it in, let him know that I'm done, I'm not coming back, where do you right now think is the best fit in terms of either pieces or just ultimately what he could fit for his future? Do you have one? Do you have a perfect scenario?
Okay, so I guess the one is there's no perfect scenario, but because we're going to assume like Damian Lillard wants to go to a contender. So that automatically I'm kind of taking out of my mind, if I'm doing a hypothetical, teams who aren't going to have a shot to really go compete with a championship with Damian Lillard set around it. There is kind of a potential trade package I could see working for a potential contender in the NBA. And people are probably going to be horrified by this idea. Because at first it would seem like this team has too many guards, and it would make sense. But the team that would be put together would probably be unstoppable offensively. I don't think it's going to happen. I think a Damian Lillard to Golden State trade could happen.
I like that. And I'll tell you why.
It would be Damian Lillard for James Wiseman, Andrew Wiggins, both of Golden State's first-round picks this year. Picks next year. Probably first rounder next year. Some second
Minnesota
round
pick.
picks.
The Minnesota pick that ultimately relayed as well, I believe.
Yeah. It would be that absolute treasure trove of picks that Golden State has. The potential franchise center. Andrew Wiggins, I would say high-quality starter with a big contract to match money. Probably a couple other role players to match cash. And that's a trade that I could see being appealing to Portland and a destination to contend that would be appealing to Damian Lillard.
So we're going to divulge this because it's funny that you mentioned that. We talked about it off record as well as I talked about it with somebody earlier today that I talked to the NBA about, with. And this is where you're getting this information in terms of just the Warriors' possible willingness, even though you don't think it's going to happen. As John Hollinger of The Athletic reported, even though the Warriors owner has made it very clear that that's not that seventh pick is staying where it's at. According to John Hollinger, is saying that the Warriors are expected, and expected is a strong word because we're less than a month away from the NBA draft as of tomorrow, a month from tomorrow. And if you're expected to use 7 and Wiseman, well, yeah, let's just throw Wiggins, a couple other extra firsts, like you said, and probably a lot of cash. Whatever you got to do to make the deal work at this point, right? Trade exceptions, mid-level exceptions, guys after free agency, whatever it may be. It'll literally be Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Damian Lillard. I mean, it's like you said, it's going to be kind of heavy there in the backcourt. However, that team doesn't not scare you in the West, does it? It's a darn good trio.
To make a point, the reason why, realizing that is 3 guards, but you think of the kind of basketball Golden State plays,
who cares?
They don't play a 3-forward, 2-guard style of basketball. They would, if they could, play 4 guards and 1 forward. Forward being Draymond Green, and put 4 guards who can shoot the lights out on the 3-point line. It's kind of a getting back to what they did with Steph, Klay, and KD, just having absolutely lethal scores on the perimeter.
The difference between Steph, KD, and Klay, and Steph, Klay, and Damian Lillard is the first 3 I mentioned there. 2 of them can play above average defense. And I don't see defensively. I see the Warriors going for it. I'm not surprised if this happens. Like, you think it couldn't, but I don't think it does either. But then again, like, you look at like a Kawhi Leonard type situation, a Paul George type situation, where like there was a haul for this guy, and it's not impossible. It's definitely there. And what we're getting is mixed signals, so like you saying, like it could be smoke or whatever, but like you mentioned last week, and I'll give you credit for this, is when there's smoke, there's probably fire. And this could be warming up to be one of the biggest draft night trades in probably a long time or ever. However, I wouldn't ask you that question if I didn't have an answer of my own. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in the last touch about Golden State, the report is that Golden State plans to use James Wiseman in the 7th overall picked up upgrade. That's 2 pretty massive things to be used for an upgrade. That's not they're not flipping that for Ben Simmons. I'm saying that not as an insult to Ben Simmons. I'm saying as a point of Ben Simmons is he's an all-star caliber player whose words are going around about him being traded. James Wiseman in a 7th overall pick is a bit much for a Ben Simmons trade. So it's clear right out of the gate Golden State is shooting for the moon with who they're going to try to trade for here.
Ultimately, it's going to come down to a bidding war, and I think what you're saying this without saying this, but there's not a lot of teams that just have the same firepower for Lillard without leveraging, in terms of leveraging the next year or two. And
I don't think there are many contenders with the assets to trade for Damian Lillard outside of a Golden State.
I'm going to give you 2 because ultimately, I've always been a big proponent of this, and ironically enough, I use the Kawhi Leonard example a lot. I use it kind of as my go-to example for a lot of these big star trades. But Toronto was a contender, I guess, with Lillard and Lowry, however you want to put it. But that wasn't where we expected him to go. Let's be real, right? Paul George was not expected to go to the Los Angeles Clippers and what ended up being a haul of about 7 draft picks. The reason I say this is because these guys don't always have a choice in where they go.
Mm-hmm.
Lately, in terms of star power moving, it seems like some of these guys do. But what I say is like, it's not their choice. Ultimately, it's the team's choice, right? So I'm going to give you 2 that have been clear about they are willing and able and open and ready to trade for Damian Lillard. And for the most part, have some pieces available. These, I'm going to say, are in no particular order, but the listeners can probably guess my particular order. The New Orleans Pelicans are probably a couple of years away from Zion not being happy, and supposedly his family. I'm not going to divulge that, but supposedly his people in his family circle are not happy that he's on the Pelicans. So they're going to do everything they can to provide pieces around him and support him. The trade would look something like Damian Lillard, Robert Covington, for salary reasons, of course, and for the fact that the other side looks like this. Brandon Ingram, Eric Bledsoe, 2021 first-round pick. The Pelicans are not good as of this moment, so these picks could be still very good in the future. Obviously, all hypothetical. Here's the other thing, though. 2021 first-round pick, like I mentioned, 2022 first-round pick via LA, 2023 first-round from New Orleans, and 2025 first-round from New Orleans. So you're thinking it's a combination of Brandon Ingram's been passed around 3 or 4 teams now as this guy that could be the next big guy. I'm starting to sell my Brandon Ingram stuff. Teams. But okay, my point being is we think
he's Trevor. Let's bring that back.
So
you're kind of throwing him under the bus. He's played for 2 teams.
To reiterate, to clarify, Brandon Ingram is a guy that I feel like we're a year away from being a year away, constantly, all the time on, and who's supposed to be developing into this next KD, whatever. He's not that. I'm selling my Brandon Ingram stock very quietly under the table if anyone wants to buy it. Reason I say that is because if you have a package of Damian Lillard and whoever else on the other side, like the Pelicans are going to go swinging like that, right? And I think the draft capital, it's a good combination of a guy like Brandon Ingram. Why I threw him under the bus as a guy that really could have potential. I really do think he does have it. I feel like we're supposed to have seen it 3 years ago. And that would be what they're leveraging on one half of the trade. The other half would be a haul of 4 picks. Bledsoe's just there to make the money work. Ultimately, it's pairing Lillard and Zion and trying to make Zion as happy as possible. Any thoughts on that one before I go to my next one? Other than, sorry, thank you for correcting me on Brandon Ingram. I'm a disgruntled Lakers fan from where Brandon Ingram ultimately got me Anthony Davis and a championship. So it is what it is.
Shouldn't be disgruntled. He got you Anthony Davis and a championship.
Yeah, but I like Brandon, man. I really do.
No thoughts. I mean, I don't know. Part of me thinks, maybe New Orleans does shift this time and really does swing for the fences to provide for a homegrown star. It didn't happen for Chris Paul or Anthony Davis, but maybe it'll happen this time for Zion Williamson. Yeah, no, I guess that trade works. So that trade really only works because of the massive draft capital that New Orleans is offering to move, which every team's going to have to. I just think you got to wonder, is Brandon Ingram that appealing?
Okay, so counter question for you. A question with a question. Is Damian Lillard at 31 years old, assuming he's going to be good for another 4 or 5 years, like he should with the current development of player health and safety in the NBA, is Damian Lillard worth a Pelicans 4, 5, 6 years draft haul? Is he worth a Paul George level haul?
It depends on if you're a team that's willing to sell it all for one championship, which I think
is ultimately the goal. I agree.
It's
the goal.
I think just about every team in the league would sell it all for one title.
You said this yourself recently. I'll give you credit for this. You said that we went through how many teams wouldn't right now trade for Damian Lillard, and we came up with 2. It was the Dallas.
I think one of them I said was Golden State.
Right now, that's what I'm saying. But they're not giving up Curry. They're not giving up Curry, of course.
And wait, you said Dallas and Dallas. No, I think I didn't say wouldn't trade. I said wouldn't swap their point guard.
Ultimately is.
And I think I still stand by that. I don't think that Dallas or Golden State would swap their point guard out for Damian Lillard.
Absolutely.
I will go ahead and add, I don't think Atlanta would now either, based on future with Trae Young. But I think everyone would trade for him if they could.
So
if it made sense, if you were on the verge of, if you're a team that can get into the playoffs or get to like a second round spot in the playoffs right now, why wouldn't you sell your whole future for Damian Lillard? Because it could turn into 2 or 3 titles.
So before I get to my other one that I think you'll see what I mean in a moment, is now that you say that, you mentioned like team who'd make it to the second round with some pieces and some money and way things work, is there's something there, and I don't think this actually happens. I don't know how the money would work. This is completely just off the top of my head, but there's got to be something there with a Victor Oladipo sign and trade for Damian Lillard, and like that package of Miami, maybe Hero, things like that. That team's good. Bam's good. Butler's good. You're capitalizing on the fact that you'd have a big three. That's just literally off the top of my head before I get to my actual second team.
So I will say, unless their front office's opinion has changed over the year, which would make sense if it has, we know that the James Harden to Miami trade talks broke down because Miami said Tyler Hero was off the table when it came to a trade for James Harden.
Yeah, and if they're not,
I think the speculation they would trade Tyler Hero for Damian Lillard seems a little out there. Now, why? Why are they refusing? I have no idea.
It's the Miami Heat. They've gotten a lot of decisions right in their short time in the NBA with 3 championships. So let's trust their word a little bit here, you know. But James Harden's James Harden, right? Let's be real. Would he have signed there in the future? I mean, ultimately, I don't know. But here's my second team that I think ultimately, you mentioned like basically draft capital and maybe a guy like Brandon Ingram, or here's the other scenario of a team. And look, you're going to hear this team a lot, and not just this trade talk, and hear me out before, don't say anything. And you or the listeners, don't come attacking me on Twitter. This is completely from a credible source. I'm not going to name the source yet, but it's something like this. RJ Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, Emmanuel Quickley, a 2021 first, which ultimately the Knicks are going to be really good if they ultimately get Damian Lillard. That pick is meaningless. 2022 first round pick swap and a 2023 first round pick. Before you say anything, this is entirely based on the fact that they are rolling with Julius Randle because he was obviously the most improved player and is looking like an All-NBA talent for hopefully multiple years and going into the prime years of his career, and only going to get better. And cap space. They have cap space, and they'd be gaining a little bit back here in terms of cap space. They have some. And you're literally leveraging the future of the fact that you just drafted RJ Barrett at number 3 overall in a draft that featured Zion and Ja. Mitchell Robinson, who they believe in as their franchise center moving forward. Quickley, who's a great guy in terms of role player and could develop into something better in the future. And a muddle of picks. This is the one that I think makes the most sense because ultimately it's not Lillard's choice, it's the team's choice. And the team doesn't care if he's going to a contender or not. They want the best haul. And to me, this is possibly the best haul. Thoughts?
I think you read the same Bleacher Report article I did, or first started my thoughts.
Yes, we did, unfortunately. But yeah.
I'm going to ask you the same question I did with New Orleans. Is RJ Barrett that appealing to the Portland Trailblazers? I think that the team that makes this trade work, you need those draft picks. But ultimately, Portland is trading Damian Lillard to a team who thinks they're going to contend and be drafting low with him. So that team is going to have to give one major asset, I think, in my book. And I think it just kind of comes down to, if I'm Portland, is Brandon Ingram enough? Is RJ Barrett a big enough asset? In my personal mindset, I think James Wiseman's a big enough asset. But even that, it's hard to think, because honestly, Portland was so close. It's kind of like thinking, who are the pieces for this team who built a playoff team, who almost made it to the Western Conference second round, who are pretty set at a lot of positions and are a pretty well-built team? What do they need is a tough question to answer at this point.
Yeah, so ultimately wrapping things up here, this is not some hot take, but I think this story is far from being done written, and not in the ending sense. No, to be clear, not in the ending sense. I think we are something and I think the thing that's I'm trying to grasp and wrap my head around is that they've already made the coaching change that ultimately could be a swing for their franchise and could be a swing for keeping Lillard. But a coaching change doesn't change the roster around him that hasn't succeeded. And I feel like there's something we're not seeing, whether that's his phone call to the Portland front office tomorrow, or that's he gets squeezed of every bit of his value up until the trade deadline, and it's another James Harden trade all over again. And here we are doing an emergency Damian Lillard pod in about 6 months, 5 months. And I think that's where we are. I think I keep mentioning the domino example with Lillard, and I just can't figure out what the next domino piece is. And I think that's what makes this story ultimately so interesting, is that at any moment you and I could be hopping on here to discuss where Damian Lillard ended up in Indiana, where he ended up in Houston, where he ended up in Golden State, wherever. Yeah. It's crazy, right? Like, so I think ultimately what I'm trying to say is that there's going to be something that we're not seeing. It's just a matter of where. And I think, believe it or not, I think you made the best point possible in all this. I think you tied together John Hollinger's piece with the Seven and Wiseman thing, where I think that is almost like under the radar piece that I think we may be looking back in a month and going, that was it. That was the key where we got suspicion of the Seven and Wiseman thing, and that's where the Lillard ended up. So looking forward to covering this with you.
I think I'll put in one last thing, because I think it would just be dumb not to cover it.
Yeah.
There's one franchise who very obviously is looking for a point guard, because they just traded theirs to Oklahoma City, and that's Boston.
So,
thing is, I think I'm very clear in my mind on what has to happen, what Brad Stevens would need to do to make it happen, and that's Jaylen Brown going to Portland. That's where it starts.
Of course.
Yeah. That could work for Boston if they would actually put everything on the table. We know that in the past with Danny Ainge, they weren't willing to kind of pony up to the table and offer the best deal. And that worked a lot of times. And that also lost them a lot of trade talks, a la Anthony Davis. But if they're willing to pony up and actually put it out there, Boston could be the ones to bring Lillard home in this situation.
If you're Portland, is Jaylen Brown in a slew of mid-level contracts and 15th overall picks? That's not enough ultimately, I guess, right? I mean, that's where I kind of go with it. Is
in my mindset, at least I see Jaylen Brown in this level above Brandon Ingram and RJ Barrett. I think he's a much better player. He's a star. Absolutely. He's an all-star right now.
Right this moment, absolutely. That could change, but right this moment, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's that linchpin to the trade. And then everyone's going to offer the slew of picks. So that's kind of your equal across the board kind of thing. I give Golden State an edge because they can offer good picks right now without any confirmation of them having to do poorly to get those, for Portland to get a good return on that. But Boston's obviously going to be offering. Everyone knows that Boston is going to make an offer for Damian Lillard. They have no point guard. Their starting point guard, I guess, is Marcus Smart. Because if it's not him, it's Peyton Pritchard. And that's not a situation they're going to stay in this offseason.
So to finish up the Boston point here, before we move on, 14 days ago, that this conversation with Boston is completely different because they don't have the money to even move Lillard unless somehow Portland's eating the Kemba Walker contract. And could this be Brad Stevens ultimately, in hindsight, where, we disagreed on how the fact that was a terrible trade and the Thunder won it by far, whatever. And I disagree with you on that. But ultimately, my biggest point was the fact that they just opened up $75 million. And could this be Brad Stevens being this Jedi mind and looking ahead here and thinking, like, if Lillard is available, because it's still a matter of if or when, could this be where he's willing to go with it and he's willing to roll and say, Jaylen Brown, we love you. We appreciate you. I appreciate your time in Boston, but Damian Lillard, Jason Tatum and supporting cast can get me a title. Possibly.
Maybe. Jersey.
All right.
A potential landing spot.
Yep. And we're going to look forward to covering it in the near future because it could literally change, like I said, tomorrow. This podcast could very well have a fifth segment at the very end where Damian Lillard gets traded, or we just scrap the whole first segment as a whole. because it could be that quick. It could also, like I said, be trade deadline next year. So, all right, Josh, playoff storylines really briefly, because coaching carousel is spinning ever so quickly.
Yeah, playoff storylines. My quick recap, I think Suns win game 5, and that's done. I think the Bucks win the next 2, and we move on. Khris Middleton's great. Yeah, that's what I got.
That briefly, huh? The Khris Middleton game is really what we're here to address, because I just have very briefly a few things to say about Khris Middleton. Olympian Khris Middleton, by the way. For a lot of people out there who, and all over social media, he's been bashed off and on, even just in this playoffs and also over the last couple of years, because not only Giannis sometimes has not showed up, but Giannis over the last 11 games has been stellar, has been consistently 25, 10, 7 or 6 or 5, something in that assist range every single night. But Middleton's been their difference maker. And we just got to put some respect on Khris Middleton's name, where he literally looked like he could not miss in that fourth quarter and was the focal point, regardless of the Trey injury, bone bruise, questionable for a return or questionable for a game 4 appearance. He will definitely play. It's just a matter of how hobbled he'll be. But we just got to give credit to Khris Middleton for just keeping this team afloat. And the Bucks, your Bucks pick, not your Bucks as a fan, of course. Everyone knows where your team is. If not, it's the Charlotte Hornets for those new fans. This Bucks team also defensively, just like I said, is continuing to show me everything that they showed me, where ultimately they do play the Suns, hopefully, assuming there's not this massive upsetting blown lead from the Suns side of things. I don't see that happening. I see that being over in the next about 2 hours here. Josh, I have a hilarious analogy for you, and I just wanted to make sure you heard this live, and I want people to know this because I think this is hilarious. The Khris Middleton analogy of his game of, like I mentioned, going from bad to good, and you would call that a roller coaster, right? Yeah,
I guess so.
Right. The roller coaster of someone's game. Khris Middleton is the Ferris wheel version of the roller coaster game. He's like a roller coaster, but boring. Shooting 25-foot jumpers that any other fan would crap down their leg to watch happen in a playoff game. And he is the Ferris wheel. He's the Ferris wheel of roller coaster players. I just wanted to put that on record. Also, Chris Paul's 2 hours away from a finals appearance. I am as happy as I could be as an NBA fan right now.
You could say boring. I say consistent play style.
By the way, I don't think it's boring. I love it as a basketball fan. It's ultimately viewed as boring, and it's unfortunate for Chris's sake.
I mean, this is so, like you point out, people haven't been like respecting Khris Middleton's play. I've been saying this for a while. Khris Middleton is an all-star. He's an unbelievable shooter. He is an absolutely certifiable number 2 to Giannis. Like, he's a real number 2, a number 2 that you can win a title with. That's all very clear. None of this really surprises me. He is that offense that you need late in the game, the shooter to take the shot when need be from the outside. He's great. I mean, it's going to, as it seems like, lead Milwaukee to their first Eastern Conference title in a long time and get them to an NBA Finals and get Giannis to the NBA Finals that we've all been wanting to see him play in.
Yeah.
We're on the verge of that.
So,
and a lot of that is thanks to Khris Middleton.
So ultimately, and we'll cover this in the future, because assuming that without saying, I mean, you said it, but I mean, we think it's Bucks Suns at this rate, right? And that could change very quickly, or that could happen, or that could be set in stone here very soon. The Suns as early as about 2 hours, like I said, from now. We can divulge it more, assuming the Bucks make the finals. But this Giannis just seems not better than 2-time MVP, but just seems so much more engaged. He only shot 1 3 in game 4, or game 3. I'm sorry, excuse me, and I did not force a single mid-range jumper. Say what you must about his 50% from the line, whatever. But he seems like he's fully engaged in being the guy that's going to attack the basket at top 5 in the playoffs rate. And Khris Middleton, like you said, is doing everything that whether you think Robin, Batman in their situation, he's being the best possible number 2 and Robin to Batman that he can be. And no matter what people think about him, boring or not, like we said, like he's delivered this playoffs for them. And I think that's what's consistently missed. And so that's the reason I wanted to at least make sure that the Ferris wheel example was thrown in there. Like I said, this playoff storyline isn't supposed to be long. It's just making sure that we're this close. We're looking forward to this finals preview. That's hopefully Bucks Suns. And please, basketball gods, please get Chris Paul into the finals tonight so we don't have to worry about anything changing that. Because we're this close. As of right now, the game just tipped, and it's 9:13 Eastern time for us on Monday. Anything else before we roll into the, like I mentioned, spinning very quickly coaching carousel?
Let's hop on and hold on for dear life.
At this rate, yeah. The fact that we're covering coaching carousel or coaching madness or whatever, insert
in the
adjective
conference
here.
finals.
In the conference finals shows you how ridiculous this coaching offseason is, and it's not even the offseason. I love the coaching changes stuff. I think it's just as exciting as the draft sometimes, depending on the draft and the year, but this year has not disappointed. Josh, to review for you and anyone else that might not have been keeping up with it in full, I've got 2 categories here where I'm actually not going to go through all 8. First, we're going to split them up into categories. We're going to go through the coaches that have been confirmed, and I'll go through those briefly, and then we'll go through the coaches' openings that have not yet to be filled. There are 8, 4 and 4. First, the Dallas Mavericks, as of recording, like I said, today, Monday the 28th at 9:15, have hired Jason Kidd, or most of these are entirely, some of them are not officially signed to the XYZ contract, 3, 4, 5, whatever years, but have been officially confirmed to be signed. Jason Kidd was hired as the Dallas Mavericks head coach last week, and Nico Harrison, Nike executive, was signed as the GM. Boston Celtics was the assistant from San Antonio and also from the Bucks and the Sixers. And Josh, I'm going to say this wrong. Of course, the listeners were looking forward to me mispronouncing his name. It's Ime Udoka. There we go. I got it right. And I love how you had me do the coaches' names knowing I'd get it wrong probably. I got it right. The Indiana Pacers hired Rick Carlisle, who coached there from 2003 to 2007, and we'll touch on that in a moment. And like we mentioned already briefly, the Portland Trail Blazers hired Chauncey Billups. Josh, where do we start?
Well, I think we've already covered everything we can about Chauncey Billups and the whole situation in Portland in depth. I would say let's start. We've got a couple of returns that are kind of cool for these teams. Jason Kidd, a longtime Dallas Maverick in his career, is headed back to coach the team. Not his first stint as an NBA head coach. It's cool to see Kidd get another shot. I think he ultimately can be a very good head coach, and it's clearly an opportunity of picking a great point guard and great offensive team captain to lead and develop a great point guard. Mark Cuban went to his guy that he trusted for so long to come develop his new guy. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree more. Or I couldn't agree more. Sorry. Couldn't agree more. I think Kidd ultimately just, got a little tripped up in his last that pun was completely and terribly horrible. That probably whenever everyone's had with the tripping and spilling the water and getting the free time out. Yeah. I tried. I was like, dude, I got to throw one pun in there. It was bad. Torch me on Twitter for it. But no, I couldn't agree more. This hire was probably my favorite ultimately. It's close. And I think it was actually entirely not for the team. I think it was literally because they know what they have in Luka and they know what Kidd can do for Luka, improving his already above average playmaking and IQ. And what better player than a top 10 point guard of all time? And Jason Kidd, I almost said 5. I didn't want to stir anything up too early in the offseason when we have a month to cover stuff. But ultimately, this is a great, great move for player development, Luka specifically, of course. And, of course, the fact that Jason Kidd's a good head coach. I don't think he was bad in Milwaukee. I just think he wasn't due for the right time.
I think that's true. I wanted to kind of point out something that people may not realize. When Jason Kidd was in Milwaukee, he made the decision to let Giannis Antetokounmpo run the point guard position. Before Giannis blows up as the megastar he's become, Jason Kidd put the faith in Giannis to give him the ball, and I would argue was instrumental in his development as the scorer and playmaker he is now. So Jason Kidd has a track record of developing a star as a head coach, and I think that'll a very different player that he's working with now in Luka Doncic, but I think a player that's much more suited to the way he played basketball than Giannis was, obviously.
That was 100% my next point. That was literally the words that were about to come out of my mouth. The reason I say that, though, is Kidd ultimately, and Kidd was a little before he was not necessarily before our time. His peak was, we remember him for those Mavericks teams, but he was good in Phoenix.
I remember him in New Jersey.
And yeah, so he had those moments where, and a lot of people forget, like, he's probably one of the top 5 smartest point guards ever. He might not be a top 5 point guard ever, but he's one of the top 5 smartest point guards ever. Go back and watch homework for the week for the listeners. Go back and watch Jason Kidd highlights. I promise it's worth it. I think a lot of his post Mavericks 2011 championship, he gets a lot of bad rap. He was a Lakers assistant on the title team. He helped, like you said, Giannis's development. He has things that he's going to be able to prove ultimately. And I think this is the perfect situation for him. It really does. Not surprisingly, of course, Dirk was instrumental in the hiring as an advisor for this position. So great choice ultimately. And yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled as to be able to watch that team next year. You want to roll into Boston next, or do you want to go Indiana? What are you thinking?
You can go for either one.
So Boston has hired, here I am again having to pronounce his name, Ime Udoka. Middle name Sunday, awesome middle name, by the way. And he most famously prior experience was a Spurs assistant for about 8 years, roughly, and won a title in 2014, like I mentioned. And I'm so curious, Jenny. I have genuinely no idea what you think of this hire, and I can't come to an opinion as well because I don't genuinely know enough about the guy. What are your thoughts on this hire?
Yeah, I don't know what to think. I will say I trust anyone coming off of anyone whose mentor was Greg Popovich. I would entrust my team to. One, Greg Popovich is one of the greatest coaches of all time. 2, the Hornets head coach was a Greg Popovich protege and James Borrego, who I'm very fond of as the Charlotte head coach. If Udoka is anything like we've seen from Greg Popovich assistants in the past, he's going to do great.
So a couple of things I took away from just doing a little research on him and just the onboarding process of his time. First of all, can I at least get half point credit, not on trivia, of course, but half a point credit for the fact that I said a former player. Now, I know a lot of guys are former players. I get it. I named a lot of qualified African-American male former players in my Boston Celtics rant on the coaching search. He was not on my list, to be completely clear to listeners who might not have heard that segment. He was on the list, just not on the podcast. I went through probably 15, 20 names. Now, he's made it clear he's a relationship guy coming from a Popovich system who built a relationship with guys like Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Tim Duncan. The list goes on. Those are the main 3. He's already made it very clear he has a relationship with some of these guys and has tried to build that over his time as a coach in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this is, media speak. I get it. But he has looked like a confident, prepared, well-mannered person in front of the media. And he looks like he's engaged and ready to, quote, push Smart, Tatum, and Brown as hard as he can. I look forward to it if I'm a Boston fan. I know ultimately the hiring wasn't loved with some other guys out there with like Phillips and Hammond, but it's a great hire, honestly, from what little I do know, from what little I've found out. And hopefully he can be a player-friendly coach ultimately, like I think that team needs, like I mentioned prior, but also still able to offer discipline and guidance from learning from a guy like Pop. I love, and you know this, I love coaching trees, and he comes from a great one.
Yeah, he does. You have to look at these coaches with who they learn from, because ultimately that's who they're going to coach like. It's seen a lot in college basketball with your Mike Krzyzewskis and your Roy Williams, who Krzyzewski learning from Bob Knight and ultimately coaching like Bob Knight and having that level of success, and Roy Williams coaching exactly like Dean Smith, having learned from him. You see these coaches are going to branch off and they're going to be like these guys they learn from. So I think if you're a Celtics fan, you want to see how Udoka is going to do it, look at what Greg Popovich does, because that's how he's going to do it. It'll be fun to see ultimately what success he has in Boston. It will be an adjustment because Boston is a much higher pressure job to take. No matter, there are 27 teams he could have come from going to Boston. I would say Boston's a much higher pressure job to take than where he was coming from. Maybe the only ones that are equally high pressure or less are the New York Knicks and the Los Angeles Lakers. Are the only ones where the fan bases are. Maybe Philly as well. Philly just because
it's Philly.
Yeah, that's good enough. I'm just not going to divulge any further on that.
So I agree with you. And ultimately, it's a matter of time. And if history of the NBA repeats itself like it always likes to do sometimes, he'll be sticking around for a while. And Celtics 10 years over the last 25 years, guys have stuck around ultimately for a little while. I see them giving him time, especially coming from his GM being a guy like Brad Stevens, who was a great coach in his time coaching. So I think they're going to give him time. Ultimately, you have time. Tatum's young, Brown's young. So it's exciting to see where the Boston Celtics go. We've already hit on Chauncey enough. Like we mentioned in the Lillard segment, shout out to Chauncey Billups for, of course, getting hired and getting the opportunity. Ultimately, a guy who's obviously a proven winner when he was a player. I'm excited to see how he does in Portland. No matter the situation going forward, they assume, obviously, he's a hire for the fact that Lillard stays. But we'll go now into the coach openings that are yet to be filled. I'm going to roll through them, and then we can just see where we are in terms of maybe some possibilities as well as some thought. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I missed one, didn't I? Ricardo.
I was going to say we should touch on Carlisle. I don't have
Carlisle, of course.
Regarding, it's another Carlisle's going home not home, but he's going back to Indiana where he's been before. After a kind of a shocking walking away from Dallas of his own volition. I don't know how Carlisle is going to do because I don't know what this Pacers team is going to look like. If there's any team that I think is kind of on that could fly towards let's go and let's contend, or could fly straight to the bottom of the barrel, and I don't really know which way it's about to go heading into this offseason, it's Indiana. Things aren't working as they are. They brought in a new coach, or a past coach, who's made things work somewhat before. And the hope is they can figure something out.
So, like you mentioned, yeah, of course, he's returning 03 to 07, which for Pacers fans who remember, was a good little time for the Pacers, minus, say, biggest brawl in NBA history. Moving on. The reason I say that I'm not necessarily a fan of it, and I'll get to why in a moment, I don't love getting rid of Bjorken after 1 year. I was clear a month, 2 months ago when we talked about it. But I like Bjorken, and I'll explain more in a moment when we get to coach fillings that have not been filled, or coach options that have been filled. He's going to have to step right in, and this is no parallel comparing Sabonis to Dirk, but he's done pretty well with a large power forward who's international player. I'm obviously making some crazy parallel here. Carlisle's going to have the opportunity to coach a guy like Sabonis, who he's familiar coaching a guy like Dirk. And I like it. I just think that ultimately Carlisle is he's still the right fit, but I think they knew something was happening in Dallas, or there was something there, because why would, like, he was hired after Dallas, like within less than a couple days. It was a very quick transition, very quick turnaround. So I feel like there was something there. Obviously the Dallas situation was more of a shock. And what makes me also think that is that Mark Cuban, even though he's a multi-billionaire, is not affect Carlisle's coaching search. He was not going to have any implications of salary on his, remaining 2 years. He was not going to have any kind of penalty there for buyout reasons and whatever, right? So ultimately, I like the fit, but I'll get to why I don't like getting rid of Bjorken here in a moment. So, Josh, coach openings that have yet to be filled. Like I said, there are 4. In no particular order, the Atlanta Hawks, I'll get to briefly, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Orlando Magic, and the Washington Wizards. Now, to listeners and to Josh, one of those things is not like the other, and we can start there. The Atlanta Hawks coaching position, technically, due to the fact that Nate McMillan is an interim coach at this very moment, in a 2-1 series in the Eastern Conference Finals of a team that could have missed the playoffs very easily, is technically still an open position. Under the assumption that McMillan, after leading them there, is going to stay, do you think he stays, Josh?
If Nate McMillan isn't the head coach of the Hawks now at this point, what are they doing in Atlanta? It would be the biggest shock I've ever seen.
Yeah, it would.
The Atlanta
be, right?
position's filled.
100%.
Yeah.
The only Lloyd Pierce story or news that we have is that as of tonight, as of about 2 hours ago, he's reportedly being evaluated to possibly join the Warriors staff. I know Steve Kerr has a high opinion of him. That's something that they were looking to interview him coming this week here. Otherwise, so 3.5 positions, let's say. I built up the suspense of the fact that there was 4. There's really 3. I'm going to start with the Pelicans because I think it's the most intriguing of the 3 left. No offense to the Magic and to the Wizards. Josh, what are your thoughts on the fact that Stan Van Gundy mutually parted ways with the Pelicans, like we mentioned, and the fact that Zion Williamson still doesn't have a head coach so far?
I mean, I'm a huge fan of Stan Van Gundy. The signing in New Orleans didn't ever really seem to make any sense, did it?
I told you the writing was on the wall.
Yeah, he got hired, and JJ Redick, who at the time was the team's veteran leader, immediately kind of expressed displeasure about being coached by Stan Van Gundy. It wasn't a good sign to start. I don't know what New Orleans is going to do.
Here's what I
They
think
are
they
a team with the pieces to become something, and the current momentum of letting it all fall apart.
So
they got to turn that around.
So I'll briefly, because we are getting here where we're ready to start rolling into trivia here soon. No offense to the Magic and Wizards once again. 2 franchises that might be in doomsday after about 3 months from now. But the Pelicans job, like I mentioned, is so intriguing because of the fact that you have a possible, big piece like Lillard maybe moving. You obviously have Zion Williamson. You also have possible rumors of relocation in a couple of years, whatever that may be. The reason I say that is because they are due for a guy that can really change the shape of their franchise in the terms of a guy that can be a head coach. And I mentioned this earlier. I told you I'd get to him. Nate Bjorken is that guy, in my opinion. And I mentioned I love coaching trees as well. I'm going to tie everything all together. It's a beautiful masterpiece here that I've been trying to build up for 30 minutes. Nate Bjorken is a Nick Nurse coaching tree candidate. Nate Bjorken comes from a line of great Nick Nurse learning, and I think he is a good guy in terms of developing guys like Zion. And I think he just wasn't given a fair shot in Indiana. He wasn't the reason. He was just the fall guy. Indiana dealt with COVID and injuries all year. Bjorken just, unfortunately, in pro sports, coaches become fall guys. And I think Bjorken has a lot of potential. I really believe that. I'll die on that hill in 3 years when he's a terrible coach, if he is, right? But I think he's the opportunity there that fits best.
My only thing I wanted to comment on, I know you kind of swept it aside, but I think my take is, I guess, if I'm someone who's coming in to become a first-time head coach, the position that intrigues me the most, and I'm going to say this because I want Becky Hammon to get hired as a first-time head coach. Of the open positions, the one I like the most is Orlando. It's the closest thing to a clean slate that you could have to start with in the NBA right now. They've traded and gotten back assets for Nikola Vucevic and Aaron Gordon. They've got Cole Anthony, who looks very good at the point guard position. They've got a returning Jonathan Isaac, who was starting to really tear it up in the bubble before he got hurt. And they've got a high draft pick this year. The Orlando Magic are a clean slate with minimal to no drama and all the possibilities of a franchise who's going to be patient with the coach they hire because expectations are so low that it's impossible to go underneath them.
So you answered my question that I was going to follow that up with, in the sense that you just want to see someone like Hammond go in there and ultimately be the fall guy in 3 years. But I guess where they are,
I don't think.
right.
I think she's built a good team in 3 years. It's a clean slate.
Yeah,
in Orlando.
She sticks around because granted, it's the same thing they did with Jacques Vaughn. Jacques Vaughn was there 2.5 years after they traded Dwight in 2012, 13, and 14. And now, granted, he went like 50 and like 140 something. But Jacques Vaughn was a fall guy in 3 years after Dwight Howard rebuild. And look what that, they went on a couple playoff runs there after Jacques Vaughn's tenure. So I hope that doesn't happen to her, which funny that you even say that you bring up Hammond. I was going to ask you after we hit on Washington and the Magic, and I was going to be like, so out of the three, where does Hammond end up? Funny how we great minds think alike there. Lastly,
I don't know where she ends up. I think that would be the best spot.
I think it's a matter of if or when,
because
and not if.
You say like after a team's blown it up, that you become the fall guy after 3 years of doing nothing. I think it's a worse situation to go to somewhere like New Orleans where it seems like the writing is on the wall that it's gonna blow up, and then it blows up while you're there. Then you're gone much quicker.
Hard to blow it up with a guy
and
like
Washington.
Zion.
I think they're both closer to tearing it down. Orlando just tore it down.
100%.
Has the assets from it and is ready to build something.
Absolutely.
That's the spot. You want to start with the clean slate, the open book, and write it yourself.
Yeah, New Orleans, and we can debate offseason stuff in the offseason, but New Orleans is not, to me. I think Washington, I agree with you. Washington is the closest, and we don't even have to discuss their head coaching thing because there's actually no true rumored candidates that have come forward. All we know is, they've reached out to Jamal Mosley, assistant in Dallas, and Sam Cassell, assistant in Philadelphia. But ultimately, yeah, Washington's the closest to full on hit the rebuild button. Orlando's fully rebuilt or ready to rebuild, of course. And New Orleans is kind of hard to rebuild quickly when you have a guy like Zion so young. So I think she ends up, like I said, I think it's a matter of when instead of if. Like we both are high on Hammond, and I think it's just a matter of same thing, top tree. But lastly, on the Pelicans, I don't think that's where she ends up, because right now the two candidates that they're planning on interviewing this week are Jacques Vaughn. I already mentioned him, of course, and Bucks assistant Charles Lee. So that's where we are with the Pelicans. Those are the two guys that were rumored in Boston as well, possibly rumored for Portland. So ultimately, I hope Becky ends up. It seems like we always say writing's on the wall, but it seems like the writing's on the wall. She does end up in Orlando or Washington. It seems like the perfect place, and I hope that happens. You ready for trivia?
Let's do this.
I'm ready to hopefully get a half-point lead or more back.
But to recap for listeners, Josh has 8.5 points because Trevor, for some reason, offered half a point that one time. Trevor has 8. We've been talking about head coaches. At the end of the day, head coaches, because we see a lot of them lose their jobs after losing a playoff series, are evaluated based on what they do in the playoffs. You got to get there, you got to win. And so today is going to be about the coaches who are the best at winning in the playoffs in NBA history. So I've got myself pulled up. It's the top 11 because number 10 is a tie. Top 11 winningest coaches in NBA playoff history. Trevor, if you can name 7 of them, you'll get 1 point. It's at 7 out of 11. If you can name 7, you'll get 1 point. If you name 10 of the 11, you'll get 2. If you can name the 11th afterwards, like even after your guesses are up, I'd give you a half a point.
All right. So to recap,
you will get 12 guesses to try to get 10.
All right, that's fair because coaches are tough, but like coaches are tied to
This
these great
shouldn't. This
championship
is
runs.
also like we're talking about the winningest playoff coaches ever. It's not like I've come to you with an obscure list of coaches.
So, to recap, this is all-time ABA, NBA, back to the
Just
50s,
NBA.
40s, whatever, 60s. Oh, but like in general, this is the entire history of the NBA.
Yes.
All right. So
most playoff wins
I'm
as a
going to
head
get
coach. So not on the staff, but as a head coach in NBA history.
I'm going to go ahead and get my 3 freebies. I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to go ahead and get my 3 freebies out of the way. My 3. Can you tell me the order, by the way? Is that fair? Can you tell me like, okay, this
as they come out? Yeah, I'll tell you what place they're in when you
right.
if you guess it right.
So let's roll. Let's do this trivia because like I got to edit it. So Popovich is, I don't know where he is, but he's very high on that list. He's probably number 1.
Greg Popovich is 3rd all time in playoff victories.
Oh no. That was the imminent fear setting in if this was a visual podcast. Okay, so Greg Popovich is correct. I got that one. Great. Duh, layup. Phil Jackson is my other layup. Guaranteed.
Phil Jackson is 1st all time in playoff wins.
Shout out to Phil Jackson.
We're talking about a coach who has 3-peated twice in Chicago and then won 3 titles in LA.
And won one as a player, I believe, in New York when he was playing. Yeah. So
not counting on here, someone who has 9 coaching championships, which I think is the most all time.
Got a lot of ranks.
Yeah.
So
ballsy guess there.
Right. So this is one that because of 2004 and also because of the fact that he was in the NBA for a little while, I have to say it because it would bother me if it was correct. Is Larry Brown, did he play long enough in the NBA to be a top 11 coach in wins all time?
So once again, I'm going to clarify, not playing, coaching.
Well,
coaching. You said, did he play in
the
NBA?
Sorry. Did he coach long enough?
But Larry Brown. You're correct. Larry Brown is 4th in all-time playoff wins.
Wow.
So he won the title in Detroit, and he's coached a lot of very good teams over time.
Oh, this is one that I should have got quicker. Doc Rivers.
Doc Rivers slots in at number 7.
That was it. The way you're reading that, he has to be on there. That's good. So I'm 4 for 4 so far.
Yes.
Oh, man.
3 more gets you a point.
Now. Oh, gosh. Oh, okay. I don't want to ask for a hint this early because I feel like there's a guy that I can't. Can I look up if a guy, or can you tell me if a guy was a coach, or am I getting him mixed up as a GM?
You can look up if they're a coach.
All right. Because it's not going to tell me anything in terms of lists. I'm thinking out loud here. This is not a guess. Red Auerbach, or however you say his name. I get him mixed up all the time as
Auerbach.
Auerbach. He was a coach, and he's definitely on that list. I get him mixed up as a GM, and I think he did. I think he was an executive somewhere in there. So
yeah, I'm glad you got that one. I think I may have been wrong on Phil Jackson being the most championships. I think it might be Auerbach because I think he had all of those 11 in Boston.
Yeah, he did
with Bill Russell. Playoffs were shorter at the time, so Auerbach's 5th on the all-time playoff wins list. But he's in there slotting right after Larry Brown.
This is one that I should have gotten sooner as
you
well.
You got 5 for 5.
This is one I should have gotten sooner. Putting pressure on me. That's why I'm ignoring your 5 for 5 comment because I really feel good about this. This list is old. I hope he coached long enough, but he coached the Showtime Lakers, so he has to be on there. Pat Riley, who's now known as a GM.
Pat Riley is number 2 overall on the all-time coaching wins list.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, Pat Riley is one of the greatest NBA coaches of all time. You also remember that he won the title in Miami in 2006, right?
Yeah, but like man, that's a long time. That's one that okay.
So you have currently gotten the list numbers 1 through 5.
Nice.
And number 7.
Oh, great. All right, my only
6, 8, 9, 10, and 11 remaining.
So 2 things to the listeners. I'm only down to one more guy that as soon as Josh asked me the question while he was explaining it, I wrote down as many names as possible because I didn't want to forget any. I'm down to 1. So we're at a turning point for this question. So I'm going to ask my first hint. Are there any more quote unquote, not freebies, but are there any more I'm going to feel dumb for missing them, guys? You know my NBA brain pretty well.
I think there's at least one.
Okay.
There's one coach with a good modern reputation, and there's one more active coach.
Oh, crap.
Who's on the list. There were 3 active coaches. You got Popovich and Rivers, and there's one more active coach on that list.
Oh, crap.
So I kind of gave you, I gave you a hint there. So there you go.
Yeah, that's a hint. I'm trying to go through, like, I don't want to pull up like Western Eastern Conference teams I'm trying to do this completely off memory because I would feel better about it. I'm not going to pull up a team list. That would be cheating, right? All right. He's active. He's won a lot recently, and I hope he's been there long enough to win, but I don't think this is right. Steve Kerr's probably 11 or tied for 10 or somewhere. Is Steve Kerr? Please, that was my last guy left that I just thought.
Steve Kerr is number 13.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I knew that would be a guess. I wanted to have the placement correct. Like I said, we're getting the number 10 is tied, I believe. At number 10, the tied for 10th coaches each have 80 all-time wins in the playoffs. Steve Kerr slotted in at 13 is just outside. We'll probably get there. We'll probably be in the list in this future in a couple of years, but is outside for now. So that one's a miss.
We talked about 7. We've talked about him today. Rick Carlisle.
No.
What? Rick Carlisle?
Not even sure where Rick Carlisle would be on the list. 6 of 8.
All right. I'm now at a stuck point. I'm now at a point where I'm genuinely going to have to just, man. The one that's bothering me is the active. Mm-hmm. That's the one that's bothering me. There's a lot of young new coaches in the NBA right now, and that's what's really bothering me. Active as in they're currently the head coach of an NBA team.
Yep.
Why did Van Gundy come to my mind? That's not a guess, of course. I was like, Van Gundy. No, wait, crap.
It's not Stan Van Gundy. I'll give you that because he's not an active coach.
I know. Oh, gosh. Billy Donovan, Scott.
And I can also point out that it's not Brad Stevens, given he's also not an active coach of an NBA team. I mean, I very much mean up to this exact moment is an active coach of an NBA team.
This is the only one left that makes sense. Tom Thibodeau?
No.
Yeah. This question, I told you after the first couple, I'm in bad shape.
I think on this one, you might end up feeling dumb at the end when you realize who it is.
All right. I'm just stuck on the fact that I need only one more to get my point. So I'm going to – how many guesses do I have left?
3. You're 6 of 9.
So I can only get one more point. That's good.
Well, at the end, like –
oh, yeah, that's true. I get one guess. That's right. So I technically can get 4 for 4.
Yeah, if you go 4 for 4, I'll give you 2 points.
All right. Now that I know I have a little bit of wiggle room here, because I'm at this point, I'm assuming I'm going to get 1 point. It's just a matter of which guy it is. Oh my God, crap. Okay. My only hint on the active guy is he in the Western Conference?
No.
So then I'm screwed. I have genuinely no clue who the Eastern Conference guy is.
Try to go outside of. You're obviously stuck on this. If you go to like
coach, you said? Active head coach.
If you get stuck on the, because you could miss your point if you get stuck on the active head coach thing.
Yeah. All right. So all-time coaches. I'm thinking through these like dynasty teams.
Got to think of people that won championships, because they're obviously going to have wins.
Shame on me for being a Lakers fan, but the 60s and 70s era coach just is slipping my mind. He's probably on there. Man.
I'll give you a last hint and say don't go down the Lakers route. Pat Riley and Phil Jackson are the only Lakers coaches on this list.
Okay, that actually really helped. George Karl.
George Karl is tied for number 10. Here's your point.
Let's go! That was a pull from the back of my brain. I thought, who played a really long, or who coached, I keep saying played, I'm tired. Who coached a really long time, but really didn't amount to anything, but he coached for a long time. and was winning a lot of regular season playoff games. Carl had to have coached long enough. He's like 100 years old.
Yeah, I think he has 80 all-time wins, which is tied for 10th.
All right, this is another one that I'm going to.
So you got your point. You would have to go 3 for 3. I'll let you take 3 more guesses, and then I'll let you know what.
All right. Jerry Sloan.
Well, there's actually. Sorry, there's 4. Yeah, there's 4 more because there was originally 11, but you can't get 2.5 points. But Jerry Sloan is correct.
Okay.
Jerry Sloan comes in at number 6 in between Auerbach and Rivers. For all that time he spent in Utah from 1988 to 2011, he coached the Utah Jazz.
So that was the one that I was stuck on. That was the one I was stuck on that I knew I was forgetting.
Won 2 Western Conference titles with the Utah Jazz.
I was forgetting a guy that coached a long time but didn't amount to any championships, and that was the part that was killing me.
Yeah, but 2 finals trips for Jerry Sloan.
I use that one as also I have to thank NBA Twitter for that, because NBA Twitter, there's Jazz fans, and I remember that somehow a Jerry Sloan debate coming up on Twitter not too long ago about he's one of the best coaches, underrated all time. Thank you to Jazz Twitter. I appreciate you for that question. So I technically can still get 2 points. No?
Yes, if you get, because technically there's 3 more. If you get 2 of them right, then you've gotten 10 in your 12 guesses. Well, in 11 guesses. I mean, in 13 guesses, but I'll give it to you anyway. Because why not?
I'm not cheating. I'm looking up if this guy was a coach, and I'm trying to tie this together. Because I think
I guess technically, to be fair, if you get the next 2, because it took you an extra guess, because that last guess was for half a point, it would be 1.5 points, not 2 points. But I'll just say it's 2 anyway. I'll be nice if you can get 2 out of the next 3. The coaches that are left are they're number 8, number 9, and tied for 10th with George Karl. Hey, pat yourself on the back. You got 1 through 7.
Yeah, who the heck is tied with George Karl? God, that's the one that's killing me. Eastern Conference active coach. I've named about.
Well, that is not the coach that's tied with George Karl.
Okay, well that doesn't help me. All these guys are all-time greats. Most of them. There's clearly one staring me in the face. I'm editing this, so you can stick this out, because I'm going to edit every bit of long pause in this review. Miami Heat fans, I severely apologize to every one of you. Eric Spoelstra is somewhere on the final.
What did you go look up?
I sat here and I looked at the Eastern Conference teams. I just looked at the teams, because you told me it was Eastern Conference. So I just stared at every one of them for
Gave you too many.
Too long. There's no way I'm getting 10. So, Eric Spoelstra.
So, with 5 Eastern Conference championships to his name and 2 NBA titles, Eric Spoelstra is number 8 on the all-time playoff wins list.
Yeah, that was the one that was staring me in the face.
Won 5 Eastern Conference.
That's just tough.
Of course he's there.
All right. No more hints. I just have to try to get it. I'm going to just make sure I'm not forgetting any teams all time. Okay. Actually, are any of them former players that are known for former players? The 2 guys left.
I don't know how to tell you if they're known for being. They were both good players.
Oh, God. That actually made it worse. That actually made it worse. That made it a lot harder.
I don't know. Almost all coaches are former players.
You said they were good players. That made it harder, actually.
Well, yeah, they were.
One of the Jones brothers from the Celtics. Was one of them a really good coach in the 70s, and I had no idea? Casey or Sam Jones? I get a point if one of those guys is correct. Or half a point. We'll give me a half a point if one of the Casey brother or Jones brothers or whatever they were.
You got to pick one. If you refuse to pick one, we'll see. You got to pick one.
Casey
Jones is number 9. And because I'll give you 2 points out of goodness of my
heart. God. There's no way.
The coach of Larry Bird.
That's who that was. That's who that. No, I knew it. I was like, what the heck? My brain.
He won. As a player, he won 8 NBA titles.
Jeez.
With the Boston Celtics. Right. And he won 2 as a head coach in 1984 and 1986.
I'm tapped out. I'm gonna give you a guess because I'm gonna give you a guess, but
I really wanted to. Oh, you're going to give
I'll
me a
give
guess
you
the
a
last
guess.
one?
I'm out of it. I got my 2.
Okay.
How many points you just gave me? I got
You
my
got
2
2.
points. I'm happy. I'll take my prize and go home. There's definitely a 76er head coach at some point in that really long
Took you
era.
13 guesses to get those 2. So I technically shouldn't have given you 2, but I'm going to be nice. So remember that next
All
week.
right, sounds good.
I'm gonna give you-
I honestly I don't know. I don't have a guess for you. You can go ahead and get it over with so I can get to editing this.
So I just kind of have to tell a story to the listeners before for why this is funny. I thought it would be funnier if you missed and out of the ends. Before we got on the podcast, I hinted to you ahead of time that'd be about coaches. And you said that you had thought so and you'd done research. And you also said, as long as you don't ask me who won the 1979 NBA Finals of the Seattle Supersonics as a joke. Head coach Lenny Wilkins of the Seattle Supersonics in 1979 is number 10.
Oh, hey, chestnut checkers, right?
That's the one that you didn't get. Was the one you cracked a joke about before we got on here.
Chestnut checkers. Oh my goodness, man! What a performance! That was my flu game.
With a lot of help from me.
Yeah, dude. You can give me 2 points. You can give me 1 point. I feel
You got 2.
Oh,
10
man,
to 8.5. So I better have a chance to get a half a point next week so we can quit doing this.
I don't want to hear a single,
8.5
not
thing.
that anyone's ever said this. I don't want to hear a single fan of this show, critique, whoever, say that we're casuals. We are not. I just gave you. Now, granted, these guys are all-time winners. Like, don't get me wrong. I got George Karl, Jerry Sloan, guys that some dudes probably have never heard of. Okay. What really messed me up was the one active. I think that really ruined my chances of going perfect, but I wasn't getting.
I just don't see how you didn't go to Spoelstra because he's
There's always one answer for me. You know that I just don't get.
I think he's the
That was the
longest tenured in one spot head coach in the NBA.
He is.
Because he's been in Miami for 12 years.
Yeah. It's just that was the one. There's one that I just can't remember on every trivia that is so bad, and I get clowned for it on Twitter. And that's the one. All right. What funny way do I close this out? You're Josh. I'm up 10.5.
You're up 10 to 8.5.
Oh man. I have not had a lead in a few episodes, so it feels good to finally have a little bit of a lead and some cushion. Not much cushion left, Josh. We are in almost the finals very soon here. This is going to be an exciting finish for trivia.
Wait,
so
really we in trivia on the finals, or do we end it at the end of the off season?
I don't know. We can figure that out off recording. We'll hash that out.
All right, whatever. This has been the 2 Pointers podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Trevor.
And we will see you soon.